We take all these pictures. What for? This is Damian Macy. I'm with the Friends of the Marshall Public Library, and today is Thursday, August the 6th. And I'm visiting with Mr. Bill Downey, who started out in Marshall, lived in some other places, and is now actually a resident of Martinsville, but he has a lot of family ties and was involved in politics and even in our county courthouse for a number of years. So with that, I'll introduce you to Bill and let him tell his story.
All right. Well, I was born in Charleston, Illinois, because that's where the doctor was, but we were living in Martinsville at that time with my great-grandmother, Mattie Blankenbaker. Yeah. And we lived upstairs in her house right on Route 40. And I can remember, obviously not when I was born, but when I was a little bit older, there wasn't a interstate yet, and even 40 wasn't near as traveled, so everything went right through downtown Martinsville.
Trucks, buses, and
there was a big bump right in front of her house, and every single semi or big truck that went by, thump, 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 and we'd sleep out on her little balcony a lot, and you could hear those guys all night long. But anyway, so I was born in 1952 on a snowy night up in Charleston. My dad picked up my Aunt Leela Harris, who was the Martinsville librarian at that time, and she came up there, and she was my godmother then. And we moved back and lived there with my great-grandmother for just 6 months or a year, as my dad at the time was running for state's attorney. My dad was William Fazek Downey, because he, like myself, our middle name is our mother's maiden name, his being Fazek and mine being Connor. And so we moved to Marshall, and Dad won that election and became state's attorney from 1952 to 1956. And I started, just barely started kindergarten. We lived down around 3rd and Cherry. I couldn't tell you the address, but it's down by TRW, and the house is still there. I remember that it had a little, like a baby bay window, that when you're 3 or 4 years old, it seems like a big window, and you could lay in that window seat. And Mom worked at TRW, which at that time was Formalite. It had just opened, I believe, in 1951 or 2. She was one of the first employees there. And so she could walk to work. It was just about a block for her to go to work.
Bill, if I can back up just a little bit, I don't think you mentioned your mother or your dad's name. Right.
Dad was William Fazek Downey, and my mom was Ramona Catherine Downey, with her maiden name was Connor. And Dad, of course, was from Martinsville, born and raised. And my mom was born in Bridgeport, Illinois, but spent most of her life in Columbia, Missouri. That's where she did all of her growing up and went to college and stuff at Stevens College. Dad was in the service in World War II in the Navy, as was his brother, and they went off there in about 44, I think, or something like that, and finished the war. Yeah, that's all I can think of right there. So I got lost. Where was I? So anyway, we moved to Marshall there when Dad was elected there, and lived down there. And when it came time to start kindergarten, I could ride my tricycle with Scott Arney, who lives here in town. And Scott was a year ahead of me in school. Only as my birthday was January the 5th. Back in those days, that made you old in your class, because the cutoff was like in December. And so I was one of the older ones in my class, and Scott's birthday was late in the year, so he was one of the youngest in his class. So even though he was a year ahead of me in school, he was only really a couple, 3 months older than me. And I would ride my tricycle up to where now it's the administration building. It used to be called the Ohio School. They're on South 5th Street. And about all I only went there for about a month. I remember that they had these great big cardboard, looked like bricks. They were painted red with little white lines around the edge, and they were an oversized brick, like in between the size of a brick and a concrete block. And you made stuff out of them, whether that was a little house that then you crawled in and out of, or stuff like that. It was something for the kids to play with in kindergarten. And that's really about all I remember about kindergarten, because like I say, I only went there about a month, playing out in the sand pile at a sandbox outside.
So the kindergarten was at the Ohio?
At the Ohio school.
Okay.
And there might have been more than just kindergarten there. I don't really know. But we moved to Terre Haute soon after that. And there we lived out of the city limits. We lived south on Highway 41 to a subdivision called Southwood. And it'd be south of Honey Creek Square a little ways. And we moved in there, and we lived out of the city limits. And at that time, to go to kindergarten, if you lived out of the city limits, you had to pay tuition to go. So I just didn't go. So I only went to kindergarten for about a month, and then started playing Little League ball and stuff. And then when first grade started, I went to Maryland Grade School, which is now an apartment complex just off of, I can't remember the name of that street. But anyway, not too far off of, between 3rd Street and 7th Street. And they're in the south end of Terre Haute. And went there for my first 4 grades, and I had a lot of good friends that I remember some of their names, and have run into a couple of them over the years. No one that would really mean much to Marshall folks, but my friends were David Drake and Tim Blackwell and Joey Saab. His parents had a rug place. They were from Syria or someplace. I remember Mom was really proud of a rug we got from them. And Crawford, his dad was a doctor, I believe, lived up in Allendale subdivision. I mean, those were some of my best friends. We played a lot of baseball together, a lot of softball at school. Started playing the trumpet in about 3rd grade there. And then when I was in the summer between 4th and 5th grade, we moved to Quincy, Illinois. My dad, here you go, backtrack a little bit. My dad was state's attorney here from 52 to 56, and at the time I believe that paid $4,500 a year. Not $45,000, $4,500. And Mom made a little bit less than that working at TRW. And my sister was born in 55, Dawn Ellen Downey. Her married name is Mackie now. And then that was all there was at that time. And then we moved to Quincy, and because Dad went to work for USF&G, United States Fidelity and Guarantee Insurance Company, as an adjuster, and they liked it that he was also a lawyer, so he could kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone for him. And he always had a company car, and we lived down there in Southwood, and then we moved to Quincy. And there my brother Bob was born, Robert Antone Downey, in 1959. And my brother Gary, the last of the 4 of us, was born in 1962, Gary Jerome Downey. And I got to help name him because his middle name is Jerome, which he doesn't like very much. But Dizzy Dean was a famous pitcher for the Cardinals, and his initials were J.H., and sometimes he told people that his name was J. Hannah Dean, and sometimes he told them his name was Jerome Herman Dean. And he had other names that he told them too sometimes, just because he liked to spiff up the story a little bit. He said he didn't want everybody to have to hear the same thing all the time.
Oh, gosh.
So I'll try to stay on track and not change the story as we go. But so anyway, youngest brother Gary was born then in 62, and we moved. So I went to school there from the 5th grade until I was a junior, where I got my first touch of politics a little bit when I was a sophomore there at Quincy High School. Back in those days, grade school was 1 through 6, junior high was 7, 8, and 9, and the high school was 10, 11, 12, because the high school freshmen didn't have anything to do with high school kids, and you were in a totally different building, miles away even from where the high school was. And played sports, they didn't have junior high baseball, but basketball and football, really loved that. And of course in the summer played on 3 or 4 baseball teams about every summer, and traveled around a little bit. Not far like they do nowadays, but travel meant like 15 miles to the next little cowpoke town of a few hundred or maybe 1,000 people. Every little bitty town had its own team and its own leagues and stuff. Payson, and we went to Hannibal, which was maybe 20 miles, central of Camp Point, and a little place called Kinderhook, and just little, not just wide spots in the road, but they had a ball diamond, and a lot of them would have a league, or at least a team in a league, and once in a while you'd play at their town. And Dad was an umpire sometimes in one of those leagues, and I always got a kick out of that because I swear he was always harder on me than he was everybody else.
Oh, surely not.
And if it was close, I'd better be swinging. And so then, when I was a junior, of course, got to the high school as a sophomore and got to play some high school sports a little bit there. Quincy was always real good, and so you didn't have a chance to make the varsity or anything, but you got to play JV and stuff, and that was fun. And then early on in my junior year, we found out that Cass Bennett, who was a lawyer here in Marshall in a partnership, Bennett and Bennett, with his brother Grindle, got sick. I believe he had some kind of throat cancer or something. He ended up talking like that, and had to use one of those voice box things, I think, at times. But anyway, they asked Dad to come in and take his place in the firm because Cass was going to take a judgeship. And before Cass took this judgeship, originally Dad had thrown his hat in the ring for this judgeship that was open. But he didn't get that. They gave that to the local guy who was older and needed the job a little more because his job was getting tougher with his voice and stuff. So Dad took the partnership with Grindle Bennett, right there on Locust Street between 5th and 6th Street, in between two great families, between Dan Harper, the owner of Harper Tire, and next door on the other side was Gene Mars Furniture Store. So we got some great acquaintances there with people we got to know for the rest of our lives. And I was a junior, and so I moved over here soon after school started, but my parents weren't coming until about Thanksgiving. So I wasn't eligible to play football. So I started working out with the basketball team. Coach Chuck Cargill, who was an idol a bit and a mentor of mine, passed away way too young, but he was the football coach, and he said, well, you better, if you're going to play football next year, you better come out and start working out with us. Well, they had a pretty good team, and several guys' names that you recognize nowadays. Tom Murphy, still local folks, and I can't remember right now. But anyway, pretty good team, and I didn't think I needed to go out and get the tar beat out of me every night, being the new kid in town and not even eligible to play games. So I went and worked out with the basketball guys that didn't play football, which would have been like Stan Reisner and Robert Gard and Brent Mason. They were all a year older than me, and I had a lot of fun with those guys. Brent worked at the Dog and Suds down south on Route 1, which I lived with my Aunt Dorothy Swope. And we call her my aunt, but really she was my great aunt. That was my Grandpa Downey's sister. Her maiden name was Downey. And they were all born in the 1800s. Aunt Dorothy and Grandpa and Grandma and them, born in the 1890s. And so I lived with Aunt Dorothy from September until Thanksgiving. And Brent worked over there at the Dog and Suds, so that was a good place to walk to. And met more neighbors and good friends. David Lewis, who is now a judge here in town, and we'll get to later, but when I got to the courthouse, he was a state's attorney. We became fast, lifelong friends. There were David Lewis, and neither one of us had a car, but a good friend, David Beard, lived south of town, just a little ways right on Route 1, and he had an old 55 or 56 Chevy, something like that. And he'd pick us up and take us to school some mornings.
And don't you wish you had that car today?
Yeah, well, a couple of cars like that I wish I had. And still see David Beard, saw him at the golf course yesterday. So those are friendships that we're lucky enough to make that last, because that's a treasure. And so junior and senior year, mostly had one girlfriend. Her name was Leslie Douglas, who later I worked with her dad. He was on the county board. They were farmers, lived out around Denison.
Oh, yeah.
And Leslie and I dated through most of high school there and went our own ways when we got to college. Graduated from Marshall then in May of 1970. Had the graduation party at our house, out in our carport. And There were a lot of people there. Who was there? No, I have no idea. But most of us were there. Huge party, because back in those days, I think the Indy 500 ran on Saturday, and we had a graduation party on Friday night. And most of the bunches of the guys, I'll bet 20, 25 of us, left directly from the graduation party, headed for the Indy 500, and stayed up all night. Went to the race the next day. That's about all I remember of it. And that was a lot of fun.
Bill, was there a particular subject in high school that was kind of your favorite, or that you...
Yeah, I liked creative writing. Couldn't tell you the lady's name. She was young and wasn't there real long. Maybe Mrs. White, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
But it was over in the, that building's not even there anymore, but it was in the building that used to be called the girls' gym. Yeah, and there were a couple classrooms, 2 or 3 or 4 classrooms in that building, and that's where creative writing was, and speech. Gave speeches and worked in creative writing, and I really enjoyed those, and still write a lot to this day. Every day, pretty much, I write something, and that was a beginning of something, because then I followed up with that a little bit in college, not as a career, but at least in some classes. And I didn't really like school that much. I liked sports and the people, but going to classes, I spent my fair share of time down the principal's office with Mr. McNary, and he'd just say, Bill, we can't do this. Because I'd start something like counting cars. We talked about cars a minute ago. Well, me and 4 or 5 guys, we were sitting by the window, so we'd keep a list, and I'd say there'd be more Fords, and they'd have Chevys, and wanted to have Oldsmobiles or something. We'd make notes and talk to each other when one would go by or something, and get in trouble for that, of course, and end up down in the office. Mrs. Stephen, and I think really, and Mrs. Elliott, that was my junior and senior English teachers.
Wilma Elliott.
Yeah, Wilma Elliott and Orthella Stephen. Mm-hmm. And I think they're both pretty good teachers and pretty good, and they tried to help me, but I was just a little ornery, didn't want to sit still or be quiet. But I think they did help spur me on a little bit to enjoy reading and writing. But they had to work at it a little bit to keep us in line. Not that we were really bad, but just disruptive might be a better word. And of course, Mr. Morris was my math teacher. And I liked easy math. When they started putting letters in it, I just didn't really like X's and Y's. Don't get it. All the adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing you want, I'm pretty good at it. I've had people in the county clerk business even said I was an outstanding mathematician. I said, as long as you keep it simple. But when they started putting letters and parentheses and brackets in there, I didn't do too well.
Why complicate things?
Yeah, I got out of algebra and whatever comes after that. Yeah, that was too much for me. But I graduated from Marshall, and thought that I'd go to University of Missouri, because that's where Mom's family's from. And I'd always kind of wanted to go there because we'd gone to a lot of their football games and stuff over the years. And Dan Devine was their football coach, and they'd had a national championship in 1960 and were real good. And he later went on to coach the Green Bay Packers and Notre Dame Fighting Irish. But he wrote me a letter and asked me to send him tapes from my football games to potentially give me a scholarship. Well, I talked to Coach Cargill about it, and we decided that in order for me to send a tape of a game, I was probably going to have to splice all 9 games together. I only caught like 9 passes the whole year, and I had a lot of fun, but Coach Cargill didn't believe in passing very much. So, and I was the backup quarterback, so I threw a couple passes, and didn't complete them. And so the chances of me playing football, there were slim and none. But so that didn't work out. But it was still pretty neat to get a letter from Dan Devine. I still have that letter to this day. I see it every once in a while. It's kind of neat. And so I decided to go to University of Illinois, which turned out to be one of the greatest decisions I probably ever made. Because then in the spring, April of my senior year actually, Jim Harper and I went up to what they call Rush, fraternity Rush. We decided we wanted to live in a fraternity. And a lot of schools, you go to school your freshman year and then you get in the house. But in Illinois, they have rush in the spring of your senior year, and you go through, and it's the biggest Greek system in the world, over 50 fraternities and about 30 sororities, and so we went through rush, and you go through, and they decide whether they want you, and you decide whether you want them, and you start going through 20, down to 12, down to 6, and down to 3, and eliminates down, and finally you pick your favorites, and they pick who they want favorites, and Jim Harper, we call him Harpo and I both were accepted into the Beta House, Beta Theta Pi. And that,
Beta Theta Pi.
Yeah, Beta Theta Pi. They just called us the Betas. And that was definitely the best thing that ever happened to me, skipping about 50 years. But just last weekend, I was at a wedding of one of my fraternity brothers who is now an eye surgeon in Birmingham, Alabama. The wedding was in Birmingham. He's an eye surgeon in Tuscaloosa. And in 2 weeks from now, we have a houseboat reunion party with some of those same folks. And so there are a lot of us that still get together regularly from the Beta House, and people that live in a dormitory don't have those kind of ties 40 years later. But a lot of people in the Greek system still do, and it's just a wonderful thing. These people are in St. Louis and Alabama and California, around San Francisco. These are ones that I saw last weekend. Mason City, Illinois, Texas, and yet we all still get together and see each other. Seattle, I visited a friend in Seattle and stayed with him for 3 or 4 days. It's wonderful.
There's a friendship and a brotherhood there that
Yes.
really
Yep.
it lasts, and
What you go through
is for a lifetime.
Yep, it lasts a lifetime. It's not just a short thing, and great relationships, and all very successful people. Defining successful is up to the individual, whether that just, some people think that's about money. I do not necessarily think that money has much to do with being successful. It can have, but you can definitely be successful without making a lot of money too. I got to admit, every one of those folks made more money than I did, but I don't necessarily think of them any more or less successful. But we all married, had our families, got grandkids, do what we wanted. Some of them are still working, some of them are retired, and it's just a great group of people that I was lucky enough to get into. And I can thank Harpo for that. I didn't even know there was such a thing as Rush, but he had older family that had been in fraternities. Yes. Yeah, a couple cousins. Cass Bennett's daughter actually was in a sorority up there, and she kind of led us down that path a little bit too. And
Is that Chris?
Yes, Chris Bennett. Yeah, yeah. And so we went to U of I, and oh my, what an experience that was. We don't have time for all that, and some of it probably couldn't be spoken out loud anyway. But we were there. Of course, it was Vietnam War time, and so there were riots and National Guard in the street, and vandalism, and just all. Oh, it was a horrible time. The country was at turmoil, whether we should be there, whether we shouldn't. And
So this would have been early 70s.
Yep, I graduated from high school in 1970. So in the fall of 70, is that they'd had this problem a little bit in 69 too, but in fall of 70 it really came to a head. Of course, I'm just a green freshman from a little town, and here we're out there, and of course we're out there in the streets and stuff chanting. I'm not doing any vandalizing or anything like that, but there were, and I'm talking 20 or 30,000 people out in the streets. Not just a few hundred or anything, but 20 or 30,000 people out chanting and singing songs, and 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't want your freaking war, and stuff like that, and sitting on the top of all the light posts, the stoplight posts at every corner. You know, there's people up there chanting, telling you which way to go and stuff like that. A lot of people went to jail, I'm sure. I don't really know, but I'll bet they did, because as we got closer to campus, we lived at 202 East Daniel in the Beta House, and to get to where most of the classes were and stuff in those days, it was across 6th Street, so it was about 4 or 5 blocks to where most of the classrooms were. We were still on campus, but 4 or 5 blocks from campus, from classrooms, in the quad and the union and stuff like that. And so between there and there, though, you're the streets are just flooded from doorway to doorway, and these people, they're up on this stop sign posts. They're telling you the National Guard's coming, so go this way or go that way. And they came in from all four directions in their full riot gear, marching. I don't know how many of them there were, lots and lots, more than just hundreds. And it got really crazy.
Was that feeling a little uncomfortable?
Oh, for sure, big time uncomfortable. You didn't want to get shot or hurt or thrown out with rocks or thrown through a window by some crazy.
Say or do the wrong thing, and you might.
Yes, whether it was
target.
with the National Guard or with the people, the protesters.
Wow.
And so yeah, it was a crazy place. And that went on for a little. That only once did they have the National Guard there like that. I mean, they were around campus for a while, but as far as the big thing like that one night. But then, shoot, a year or two later, though, then it all went the other way. It was all peace and love. And then you had 20,000 naked people in the streets. They called it streaking. And and I'm not exaggerating a bit. The title of the article in the Daily Illini, the campus newspaper, was something about 20,000 people streaked through campus or something, like 15,000. It was lots. Guys and girls did make a bit of difference. And girls that were particularly well endowed above, well, they'd put them on a chair and carry them around up above their heads and stuff like they were old Roman Empire or something like that. Had a couple poles with a chair on it, and they'd parade them down the streets. That was a while. So it went from crazy National Guard stuff to crazy naked people. But I managed to pass, keep my grades up, and had a lot of fun.
What did you major in, Bill?
I was a finance major.
Okay.
Thought at one time I might go to law school, because since Dad was a lawyer. And so I stayed in business and in finance. And my grades weren't that great, but good enough to keep going back anyway. And was able to graduate. It took me one extra semester. But when I was somewhere along in there, I reckon it's probably the end of your junior year, beginning of your senior year, you go and take what they call the LSAT, which is, they call the law boards. I'd been out all night, probably drinking beer and hanging out with all the fraternity guys, and then went in the next morning at 8 o'clock to take this test. And I was the only person in there that even looked like me. It was all minorities. And I mean 90% women and people of color and from other parts of the world, and there weren't, out of like 300 people, there weren't 10 or 15 that looked like me, so to say. And so I said, I don't know about this. I took the test and didn't do that great. I think I was about the 25 percentile or something like that. But I figured all the rest of these were geniuses, and I was just some kid that stayed out all night drinking and said, all right, I'll go take this test. And so I never went to law school. That didn't happen. So I graduated then in December of '74. The first 3 years we lived in the fraternity, had great time with some of those guys that I mentioned. Nobody else. Well, actually, Greg Mars was 2 years younger than me. So when I was a junior, Greg Mars, his dad was Gene from the furniture store, came up and lived in our fraternity. And then other Marshall connection was Ken Claypool, was a year older than us, and his dad had the insurance business around the corner from where my dad's office was.
I've heard of that guy.
Yeah, your next door neighbor. And Ken was in the Alpha Delta Phi house, which was a couple blocks from ours, but we had like a great relationship with their house, because they ended up with Jack Livix and Randy Welsh and David Schaller. That's the only ones I can think of off the top of my head. Anyway, so they had 3 or 4 Marshall guys in their house, and we had 3 or so in our house. And so we got together a lot for cookouts and football games, and just a lot of good times. It was almost like we were brother houses or something like that. And so that was a good thing. And for rides back and forth to home and stuff. Yeah, Mike Gustafson was a guy from here in town that was in my high school class. He gave me quite a few, especially freshman year. He had a car. I never had a car while I was in college. And so that was good. And like I say, went pretty fast through school there. graduated. Had summer jobs, of course. Had some great summer jobs. Worked for the city a couple summers, and down at the state park, Lincoln Trail State Park, for Leon Cooper, great guy, and worked with a lot of the city guys back in those days: Glenn McClary, Art McCarty, Bobby Joe Francis, and Earl Stover. Raymond Miller was the head of the gas department. He taught me to take care of my tools. Every day when you got done, you didn't just throw them in the back of the truck. You cleaned them off with water, and then you oiled them, and then you hung them up neatly or put them in where they belong. And that was a good lesson. I don't always do that as well as I should now, but I try, and I definitely remember it. I know better when I don't put one away and clean it up first. And that was Raymond Miller that taught me that, because he was the head of the gas department. And then sometimes I worked out with the Paul Rimlinger and Slim Moorcraft. Slim was a great guy. Paul too, but especially Slim, I liked him. His real name was Claude, I believe. He's a brother to a bunch of Moorcrafts around here. He's gone now. But anyway, Paul and Slim ran the water treatment plant, and they'd run the overflow from the sewage after it had been kind of like cleaned. They'd run it out into these pits and that were sand bottoms, and it'd be about 18 inches deep, but it'd settle to about 6 inches deep, and it would grow the most awesome tomatoes. It was wonderful fertilizer. And people from town, especially Earl Turner, who was his own book in himself, would come, and we'd load up his pickup truck. We'd shovel it full of that poop from the treatment plant into the back of his truck, out of that sand, and into his truck. And
he always had a great garden and wonderful tomatoes.
Yes. Well, they came over from Channel 10 News, one of those Kevin Orpert type guys, or Allen guys that come or go around to people, came over to Earl's garden and talked to him about it, because tomatoes and green beans, and Earl was a great gardener and a wonderful storyteller. And his daughter went to University of Illinois. So that was something I skipped. While we were at Illinois, Dad's Day weekend and Mom's Day weekends were treasured weekends. And with so many Marshall people up there, we'd all get together. And oh my, were those big fun. It'd be on a football weekend, at least Dad's Day weekend always was. And the dads would stay at the house. I remember my dad was a big beer drinker, and as were most of those other parents too. But we were just kids, and we thought we were beer drinkers, but we didn't really know what it was about. We hadn't been training near long enough. And Dad would be up at 8 o'clock in the morning and just go into the room. Hey, let's go. Good morning. Rise and shine. Up and at 'em. And oh boy, those college kids are like, they're whining. Oh, who is that? Get him out of here. Dad's walking around getting people orange juice. He started drinking beer again about 9 o'clock, and that was the last thing most of us wanted to see. But we had some great time. We'd stay up late and play bridge after we'd close the taverns down, or back in those days they closed around midnight or something like that, 1 o'clock. And came back and played bridge real late. And we did that on Mom's weekend too. We didn't do quite as much drinking, a little bit, but not near as much as with the dads. And Bob Gwinnett was in on that too, because he had a daughter, Susan, up there. And Bob liked his beer. So he had Bob and Omer Schaller and Earl Turner, Jim Claypool, and Gene Mars. And, just a really good group of folks. I'm sure I left somebody out, but that's some of them. And then on Mother's Weekend, then you'd have all those moms. And that's when we really played a lot of bridge. And had a lot of fun, because my mom really enjoyed bridge and had a lot of friends that played bridge. I substituted in her duplicate bridge club even a couple of times with Juanita Ballman and Belva Turner, Earl's wife, and Mary Hammond, and good group of folks there. And so I survived college and graduated one semester late there in December, and came back home and went to work for Larry Woodard. Now, one thing, a few regrets in my life. One was when I got to Illinois, I went to go try out for the baseball team, and they asked me where I played and stuff, and we didn't have high school baseball. So I said I played American Legion baseball. And they said, well, I'll tell you what, if you want to try out, you come back in February, after we get back from our spring trip. Because the college teams from the north, at the beginning of the season, the 1st of February or the end of January, they go to Alabama or Florida or some Texas and play 8 or 10, 15 games because the weather's better, and then come back up north to start their home season. And by then, I'd learned more about drinking beer and girls than I never did go try out. And that's one regret that I have. We'll never know. But that was a lot of fun. Now I forget what the other one was. Oh, after graduation, I went to work the next day. Graduated like on whatever, didn't go to graduation or anything, but you graduated. And shoot, at Illinois, there's thousands of people that graduate. Well, I wasn't standing in line with 5,000 people to get my diploma. I said send it to me in the mail. And that was like on the end of a week, whatever. Came back and went up to work for Larry Woodard on Monday.
Now, was that in the accounting
Yep,
business?
same place. Larry still has his office. Yep. At that time, C.D. Hammond actually was still involved, and was kind of phasing himself out and trying to phase me in. Well, that was okay, except they only paid me $700 a month. I took home $549.16 a month. You got paid once a month. Well, I didn't have a car, so I went and bought a car, brand new car. My first car I ever owned. I was 22 years old. A 1975 Pontiac Grand Am, baby blue.
Nice.
It was $5,500, and I had a $152 payment once a month for 4 years. And I was able to live on that $549 a month for 2 or 3 years before I got a raise. And CD was pretty much gone, so I felt like I was carrying my load with the work-wise, but I was learning a lot. It was a great learning experience. The biggest thing, you did a lot of books and stuff, taking care of businesses, books and their sales taxes, payroll taxes, all that kind of stuff, but also in the income tax business.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where I ended up finding my niche, because after I left Larry Woodard, after about 5 years there, I decided to give that a end, and went to Florida. Gave Woodard about several months' notice, and about a half a dozen of us decided we were going to Florida for the winter. And so we went to Florida and found jobs digging ditches and directing traffic and whatever it took, painting houses and stuff, and got down there around Christmas, right after Christmas, and come 1st April though, we were ready to come home.
You left the accounting work behind you then?
Totally. Yeah. I was done with sitting in an office, as far as I hoped anyway.
What part of Florida were you in?
We were staying around Sarasota and Bradenton. Okay. We had some friends there and knew somebody that could help us get a job. There was a construction company that was putting in phone lines, or actually they put in the PVC pipe to run the phone lines through from up around there all the way down to Naples and Port Charlotte and going south along the Gulf Coast. And at that time there wasn't much there. And nobody was from Florida.
No.
You couldn't find a person that was born in Florida unless they were an Indian. We had a couple of Indians that worked with us. And I mean Seminole Indians, not Indians from India. But because they were the original settlers there. And until all the white people came in and ran a bunch of them off.
Even today, you find very few Florida natives.
Right.
Like.
Yeah, they're hard to find. And so anyway, we had a winter job there. Worked hard and played hard. And had one experience there that I'll leave with you. Is I was we were digging ditches, putting these pipe in and stuff. So in Florida, to dig a ditch or to dig a hole to put a manhole in, say a manhole that's 20 by 20, goes down in the ground about 20 feet and it's 12 feet across, you got to dig a hole as big as this room almost, because it's all sand, because it just keeps caving in. So around the outside edge, you put what they call well heads in, which is a pipe that's perforated all the way around it. And those go down, it has to go deeper than the hole's going to be, and they pump the water away so that the walls won't cave in. So I'd worked a day shift, putting pipe in the ground, and about 5 o'clock the guy came by and said, hey, we need somebody to guard this pump tonight. If we don't, somebody will come and steal it, because it's out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, miles several miles from a light, a street light, a house, anything. There was nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing out there, miles away. And a lot of guys didn't want to hang out out there by themselves. I didn't care. I said, no, that's all right. I took a football with me, and I just punted up and down that little, wasn't really a road, but a dirt path where they were running this, and listened to the radio in my car. Had that 1975 Grand Am, my first car, and but about 3 in the morning, I fell asleep sitting in my car, and when I woke up, there was a guy leaning over my hood trying to steal the battery out of my car. And the Grand Am had a great horn, and I hit that horn, and that guy jumped right out of his skin, I think, and took off running, and I didn't bother to chase him or anything. And scared him. So I got out, made sure the pump was still running, and it was, and everything seemed to be fine. So I was like, "Whoo, boy!"
You still had 4 wheels.
My car was fine, and the pump was fine. It was running. Everything was going fine. Okay, so it comes 7 o'clock in the morning. The day shift comes in. I go to the beach, drink a couple pina coladas, and go to sleep. And about 10 o'clock, I'm there sleeping on the beach, and in a chair on the beach, and one of the guys comes and wakes me up and says, "Frank wants to talk to you right now." Frank, can't remember Frank's last name, Durr, I think, because the name of the company was Kenton Durr, Frank Durr. And what's he want? He says, "I don't know, but he's not very happy. You better get in there." So I jumped in my car, went to the office, and Frank says, "Did you fall asleep last night?" I said, "Well, I did a little bit, but I woke up and I saw that guy that was messing around out there." He says, "Well, did you check the pump?" I said, "Yeah, I checked the pump." Well, luckily for me, when you steal the battery out of one of those pumps, it still runs, the pump does, because it was only using that battery to start it. And because the guy had stolen the battery out of that pump. But since it was already running, it kept running. You had to put gas in it once or twice during the night to keep it running all night. And I'd filled it up and didn't even notice the battery was gone. Oh boy, he says, "Well, since you'd already worked a day shift, we would ask you to work a 12-hour night shift too. I'm going to let you off this time. You can keep that job, but stay awake from now on." So I did, but I won't never forget that.
But that battery was not a 2495 one either.
Probably not. No, probably pretty heavy. Yeah, probably not, because that.
I want to come back just a second, Bill, to your 1975 Pontiac. Did that come from
Flowers
business across the street here at that time, or they already moved?
They were out there. Okay. They hadn't been out there very long.
Okay.
But yeah, they were out there where Pizza Hut is now, or next door there, where Forsyth has that little place. Yep, sure enough. Yep, it had red, white, blue little trim around it. Oh, it's a pretty car. Rode great. Had plenty of power. Had about 150,000 miles on it when my son killed it. But that's another story. But so anyway, that was 1980 that I went to Florida after leaving Larry Woodard's office, and came back in the spring. Didn't want to spend the summer in Florida. They didn't have baseball back then. There weren't Tampa Bay Rays or Miami Marlins back then, so we had to come back. We got home in time to go to opening day in St. Louis, and because we did that for about 25 years. Went to opening day for the Cardinals in St. Louis. Raymond Durst and I. And so then the summer of 80, I became a paint contractor around here locally, and did that for 10 years. Started out just doing local stuff, and expanded into doing post offices out in Nebraska and Colorado and Robinson, Illinois, down by Mount Carmel. Can't remember the name of that little town right now, where Edwards County, Albion. Painted the post office in Albion, Illinois, and did that for 10 years. Went back to Florida in the winter of 81 with Scott Payne and Dennis Beard, one of my best friends that left us here about 3 years ago. Dennis Beard did. And we started out to go to Texas, thought we'd work in the oil industry, but that didn't work out. And so we went back to Florida and got a similar job, just about the same job. But I worked for the same company again, and Scott Payne went to work with me, and Dennis was a plasterer, so he didn't have any trouble finding work down there.
So was the painting involved signs and all too, or was it just
No.
strictly the?
No, houses, inside and out,
Surface.
businesses, yeah. And then when we came back, once again, we were just there from Christmas till about April 1st, came back for opening day again in '81. And then we really got serious into the paint business. Scott Payne and I, and by myself, and then later hooked up with Bob Mott, and I were partners in the paint business for several years, about 8 years. And made good money. I tell people that we painted the inside of the Marshall Post Office or Marshall Courthouse, and I made more money there in 3 months being the paint contractor than I did all year, as I later did when I became the county clerk. County clerk paid when I started about 30 grand, and I made about 40 painting there, and it was only in 4 or 5 months instead of a whole year. So public officials don't do it for the money, that's for sure.
Coming back to this painting thing, and I
Mhm.
guess I've always wondered, something like a contractor, did you pick the paint, the brand, and the colors and everything, or did the owner of the building?
Depends on who you're working for. Some people were specific. Mostly we bought everything we could. When it was up to us, we bought it from Gene Mars. Gene Mars was great. He took care of you. He kept track of everything you'd ever bought from him. He had a little card file, and it told you what you bought, what color it was, how he mixed it, how much of it you used, blah, 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 what house it went on, what room in their house. You know, he said, you painted Damien's bedroom on the 3rd floor with this opaque. And on the 1st floor, you painted it yellow and you used this mix and stuff like that. So if years later you need to match something or something like that, Gino had the records, and that was great. And he always gave you a 10% discount. Sometimes the people would have us charge the material to them. Like you'd say, paint my house and just charge it to me up at Gino's.
Oh.
Well, Gino would charge you 20 bucks a gallon, but he'd kick us back $2. He gave us 10% discount on anything that us or our clients bought. And he didn't give you money, but he'd let you spend it, which was great because then you could buy the expensive brushes from him instead of those cheapos. And there's a big difference in paintbrushes.
He had top quality product.
Oh yeah, MAB paint was quality stuff. So whenever we could, we bought everything through him. Now you could get Porter, which is decent, and Terry Stephen ended up in that after Fred Idle sold Idle Dutch Center to Terry Stephen out there. And then Stones had it or have it or something. But so we tried to go through Gene. And sometimes if it was a bid job, we'd just say, well, we'll paint this whole thing for $2,500. And it was up to us. We might make $10 an hour. You might make $50 an hour. It just depends on how hard you wanted to work and how good you did. And
If you ran into some flaky paint up there, it might be a little more.
yeah. Sometimes it'd be one of those growing jobs. And while you're here, would you do this room too? Or I think we want to plaster this wall while we're at it. Or let's do these windows or something like that. Which that was all right. Yeah. And so I enjoyed painting. Painting was a good thing. You could see what you did at the end of the day. There was a sense of accomplishment. And you're dealing with the public, which was fine, but for the most part, just one public person at a time. You know, not like later at the courthouse or in the accounting business, you had lots of bosses. But if you go to somebody's house, usually you're just dealing, or a business, the owner of the business or the owner of the home. And now there might be a husband and wife thing a little bit or something, but for the most part, you had one boss and they told you what they wanted, and that's what you made them happy. And we were pretty good at making people happy. And of course, then the bad places sometimes to work for was good and bad. Churches and banks. I always said they've got the money, so it's good to work for them because you're going to get paid and they can afford to pay you and everything. But you end up with more than one boss. You got the preacher wants this, and the head of the building committee wants this. And well, I've been going to church here for 40 years, and I think that should be a lighter shade of blue. Oh, Jack Huffington. When we did the Methodist church right over here, the outside of it, did the windows and stuff. Yeah, Methodist. And Jack Huffington got down the street about 3 blocks with his transom to look to make sure we were putting 2 coats of paint on the inside of the gutter. He wanted the first coat in a red and the second coat in more of a brown, so you could see that it got 2 coats. And that, we were going to do it, but he was checking on us to make sure. That was just the way he was, and that was all right. Got along with him good. Made him happy, so that all went well. Yeah. But yeah, painting, I enjoyed painting. But I'm glad I didn't have to keep doing it till I was old enough to retire, because it physically, I've got, my thumbs are mad at me from painting for years. My thumbs don't like me. And
How about the legs on ladder?
yeah, and that didn't bother me. I had pretty good legs, so I was okay there. But my thumbs to this day don't get mad. And I only did it for 10 years as a full-time job. But it was a full-time job pretty much. Tried to, and then in the winter though, I could go back to doing income taxes. And we started out with only doing about 30 or 40. Me and Carrie, my wife. Well, heck, we better backtrack a little bit. I painted till 1980, or from 80 to 90. But in 83, I met my wife. Met Carrie Ann Chambers, and I'm the luckiest man in the world. And she already had 2 little kids. Dale Sutton was her first husband, and he had trouble finding his way home, though sometimes, I guess. And so they got divorced when the kids were about 3 and 4. And I came along when they were about 4 and 6, or something like that. And
What year was it that you were married?
we married in December the 3rd of 1983. The next day was her birthday, December the 4th. And we dated for about 6 months or so, and had a very nice wedding there in Martinsville at the Bible Church. Reverend Nicka married us. And then we had a small wedding, just a few relatives and a couple friends. And then, let's see, then and had the reception at the American Legion. And my mom was hugely active in that and helped make all the food and everything. And I don't know how many people there, but it was packed, because most all of my fraternity brothers and stuff had come, and there were just people from all over, let alone the locals. And had a big time. That was a lot of fun. And so that was in 83. For our honeymoon, we had a choice. Can't remember who, and I think my mom was going to send us on a cruise, but we decided not to, and we were going to go to California to the Rose Bowl. And my Uncle Gary, my dad's youngest brother, got us tickets to not only the Rose Bowl game, but to the parade. And the parade is one of the neatest things I've ever seen. All those are made with flowers, and it's just. And we had seats about 2 rows up, right on the street where everything went right past us, and you could smell them, and you can see how they're all individual flowers of every color imaginable and unimaginable. And to think that they start working on those, building them. The day after the Rose Bowl, the day after the parade's over, they go right back to work, start building next year's. And of course they have to be fresh, the flower part, and everything. It's just an amazing thing. I was really glad we got to do that, even though Illinois got killed like 49-7 or something.
The parade was worth it.
Yeah, the parade made it worth it. Yeah. Backtracking again a little bit. Really bad time was 1976, when I was working for Woodard there, and my roommate I lived in a little house there. We rented off Earl and Belva Turner there north end of town, and was Bob Greenlee. And he died in an accident. He was an iron worker down at Newton, and he fell about 80 feet and died. And then not very long after that, my dad, on April the 18th, Easter Sunday, passed away. Just came home that night and laid down and was gone. Never was in pain or anything, but he was only 52.
Yeah.
Way too young. And then my sister got married in June to Clark Prevost. Great guy. But right around Thanksgiving in November, he died in a car wreck. So 1976 was a really bad year for us. The bicentennial, both, but it wasn't a good year for the Downey family. Losing my dad and brother-in-law and Bob Greenlee. Yeah, 3 really super people that were gone. Yeah, but we made it, and so then we stayed in the paint business, And doing the income taxes, the wife started helping me do income taxes, and she got really good at it too. First, she was just making copies and putting them together.
Did you do that out of your home, or did you have an office?
Did that out of our house for a while, for 3 or 4 years, and then we got an office down on 2nd Street that we rented off of Warren Strom at the time. He owned that building. It used to be the Marshall Grocery. Now Charlie Roach has his heating and air business in there, and I think there's some girls cut hair in there or something.
Okay.
But we had an office in there for a few years, and because it just couldn't do it in our house because we had over 500 clients. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Gosh, yeah.
That you could, and one thing I liked about tax season, I really liked doing it, but I wouldn't want to like working for Woodard and doing it all year. Tax season, April 15th, it's over. It lasts 10 weeks and it's over because we didn't do extensions. When I worked for Woodard, we did taxes till August and stuff, and people would file extensions, whether it was the taxpayer's fault or the tax preparer's fault, whatever, it didn't matter. You did taxes for months and months. Well, when I went into business on my own, I said, not only do we not do extensions, but if you come in after April 1st, we're going to charge you double. Because I didn't want to be doing them late. And once the weather gets nice, it's baseball season. Once I got married, we had kids that were playing, softball and baseball and stuff. So get them in to me in February and March.
So how many people did you have bring in the shoebox of everything and dump it? Here it is.
Roy Lee Tingley, bless his soul. He was a friend of my dad's and a really good guy. He had a tough life. He was a railroader and a farmer, and been injured in motorcycle wrecks and women and ex-women. Oh, he was a character, a real character. But he would bring in a couple of grocery sacks just full of pieces of paper. And the first couple of years when we were still living at home, that I just had to dump them out either on the living room floor or on the bed. It started out with the bed, but I realized that wasn't going to be enough room, and I wasn't going to be able to have them picked up in time. So I had to advance to the kitchen or the living room floor. And told Roy Lee, you're going to have to do better too. These sacks are going to cost you. He says, I don't care, just tell me what I owe you. Because some people don't care about that.
Did you ever get him educated?
He did get better. Yes, he did. He got better.
Right.
Which is an important thing, though, to try to train your clients to bring you what you want instead of just a bunch of stuff. And some of them do well at doing better, and some of them never come around. But Roy Lee came around a little bit. Yeah, not all the way, but at least not the whole grocery sack. Yeah. And so we did those for several years. But that really matched with the painting business. Carrie was working at the Goody Shop in Terre Haute, a restaurant over there. She was managing that for the owner guy there for a while. And she'd worked there since she was a teenager. And I could paint. Most painting was outside. You do some inside work, but in the winter, people don't really want you tracking a bunch of snow and stuff inside their house either. So the winter was slow in the paint business. You could do a little bit, but it was slow. So that matched good though with the income tax business, because you knew that was going to start in January, getting people ready, and then February, March, you're busier than heck, and then April, you're wrapping it up. And if they walked in April 15th, we just sent them to go see Henry Block. We weren't doing it. I don't care how much money you want to pay me, I'm not doing it. And did that then. We did it for quite a while, because then Carrie had 2 kids, Emily and Jacob. Emily was born in 76, and so there was one good thing about that year. I didn't know it at that time yet, but Emily was born in 76, and Jacob was born in 78. And so, Carrie lived on 6th Street, across the street from the school, in front, there in a house we sold it to Frank Pierce, and Rabbit Pierce lived there. And now it's right next to the church. It's the house next to the First Christian Church built there. And then my mom decided to move to Martinsville into an old family house, the oldest house in Martinsville. And that was the Chancellors, which is my relatives, going back many generations. And so Mom was going to move there, so we bought Mom's house, which was just behind the grade school and faced the playground in back, which is still there. And so in one day, we moved my mom totally to Martinsville and us totally into that house. We had a lot of friends and pickup trucks and a horse trailer, and we moved mom out and then moved us in all in one day. Nowadays, I talk to people and they take some weeks and months. I go, well, that's a bunch of baloney. Don't you have any friends? Well, we did, and they helped.
I think part of it's
Dennis
just
Miller.
getting organized and puts, what's in this box and
Yeah.
where it goes.
Well, and you got to have that done before they get there. If you don't, that's what happens nowadays. I'll show up to help somebody move, and they're not ready. But we had it all in boxes and everything at my mom's house and at our house, ready to go. And we'd already done that. So they just had to load them in their vehicles and take it to Martinsville or take it over to our house, and it labeled on the top, kitchen, bedroom number 1 or whatever. And they didn't have to worry about it. Where's this go? Where's this go? Just sit it in that room and we'll straighten it out when we're done. But so yeah, that was a big day. Cost me a lot of beer and a little gas, but that was it. And yeah, Dennis Miller, Stan Reisner, Jim Harper. I can't remember who all helped us move. Dennis Beard, I know that. Scott Payne, probably. Several of those folks had pickup trucks, and it was a good day. Had a lot of fun. Got it all done before dark, and that would have been in about. See, we got married in '83. That would have been about 87 or 8, something like that. I found that most of my life I lived in a house for about 4 or 5 years, and then moved on with my parents, and then college, and then me. And
That house that your mother moved into, you mentioned the Chancellor House, and it was Matty Blankenbaker's. I've always I felt such an interesting house. Did they have to do a lot of restoring to that, or did your mother do a lot of work to it?
Yes, everybody that's moved into it, because it was built during the Civil War,
Yeah.
1850. Actually, before the Civil War, 1850 something, 51 or 56. But anyway, right before the Civil War. And yeah, I remember doing a lot of growing up there, learned to play canasta there. And but when Mom moved in, she did a little remodel job, new carpet, all painted and stuff, and fixed a couple windows and stuff. And then my sister, my mom passed away in '99. My sister kept it for a while. And is a money pit, a big old house. And Kathy Haskins owns it now, who lives in Martinsville now, and lived in Martinsville, and she has sold it twice I know of, and I think 3 times, and got it back, like sold it on contract and got it back. So I don't know how that's worked out for her financially, but I think she still owns it. And,
It's such an
and she's done
interesting
some
house.
major remodeling to it too. Trying to sell it. Yeah, it's a big, neat old place. Great big white pillars out front, a nice little
And I think
backyard.
the pillars and the width of it make it look like probably a bigger house. Than it
Right,
really
it's
is.
not really as big as it looks. Yeah. And then right in the backyard, is the cemetery, which all my relatives, or not all, but a bunch of my relatives on that side of the family are buried right there on the corner. My grandma and my great-grandma and great aunts and uncles and grandpa, they moved him there, brought him back up from Columbia, Missouri. He's there. And so I've got a lot of relatives right there, just right off the boundary line there.
And many people are not aware that cemetery is even there.
Right, yeah, if you don't go down that little alley, you wouldn't really see it because there isn't a street that goes past it or anything. It's in behind those 2 or 3 homes. Because 2 doors over was my Aunt Leila Harris, next door to the insurance, well, it was an insurance place, and now it's the school administration building. Yeah. So, let's see, we're up to about, I decided to run, well, in 1990, I had never really thought of it. Well, I guess it would have happened in '89. We were still doing the paint contracting, and I'd got some good jobs. Like I said, those post offices were real good money, traveling around, because you'd bid them, and then you'd have to sub out maybe some welding or some roof work or something like that to somebody else, but we'd bid it and sub that part out to somebody else. And those were good money makers. So we got the one in Albion done, and we were headed to Robinson. And Norm Casemeyer, 2 people who were very important in my life. Norm Casemeyer was kind of like a dad to me after my dad passed away. And Buck Weaver from here in town.
Oh, yeah.
came up to me and said, "You need to run for county clerk," because I'd already run for township assessor and beat Jack Davidson, as a matter of fact, who's a friend of the family, but ran as a Democrat, which is hard to do around here, and won the township assessor's job. And I think I ran for that twice, had that for 6-7 years, because first I got appointed to complete a term of somebody, and then I ran for it once or twice.
That was assessor first?
Marshall Township assessor. Yeah, that was my first local political thing. And thankless job, paid a whopping $1,500 a year. And you could work as much as you want. Dan Smith was the supervisor of assessment, so you turned in your books to him. And luckily, he was very understanding, and they did a lot of the work there, because for $1,500 a year, you only get so much. And they'd give you a list of all the new places or people that had updated their homes. You had to go check them out and measure them or draw pictures of them and stuff like that, take pictures. So anyway, did that for a while. And anyway, so Buck and Norm came and said, "I need to run for county clerk." And I said, "Well, no, that's Les Little's job. Nobody's ever going to beat Les." And they go, "Les is going to retire." I said, "Oh, well, maybe it's time. Maybe I should do that." And so I was just 39 or something like that. And I said, "Well, all right, let's talk about it." And I decided to run, and I ran against Shirley Shoemaker, who had worked for Les for 10, 15 years. I don't know exactly, but she'd worked in that office. And we got out and we knocked on every door in Clark County, and there's a few. And I know we knocked on most all of them because we had flyers, and we went through like 10,000 flyers that were red lettering on yellow. That was our colors, red, and yellow, because it stands out. We wanted people to, every time they saw red or yellow, we wanted them to think about us. So yellow background and red lettering, even on these flyers. And we handed out over 7,000 of them at doors, and knocked on every door in the county and every door in Casey twice. Yeah, because it's hard to get votes over there. And so we hit them first and last. And mostly it was family. We took a lot of people with us. Carrie was babysitting a little bit at the time. Sometimes I'd come home for lunch. She'd have 13 kids there running around. I said, "I'll go back uptown for lunch sometimes."
Oh, gosh.
And she'd got out of the restaurant business. And so we ran, and long story short, we won by about 135, 150 votes, something like that. And it was back and forth all night. We were up at the courthouse. Oh, and 2 days before the election, my grandpa Downey died. And he had been very, very supportive of me running, because he had been a precinct committeeman and been in politics all his life, and a county chairman a long, long time ago and stuff, and gave us a lot of insight on what to do and how we should run and what not to do. And he voted absentee, and 2 days before the election he passed away. So the funeral was the day after the election, and the day of the election all my relatives were in town from all over the place, California, Florida, Missouri, Texas. And so the night they all stayed up at the house, at our house, in the evening while the results were coming in, while Carrie and I went to the courthouse. And we're at the courthouse, and it's back and forth. We're ahead, we're behind, we're ahead, we're behind. And finally Shirley comes down the hall, because they got the results down at one end of the courthouse, and they would walk them to the office at the other end. And Shirley comes by and says, "Congratulations." I'm like, "Well, still got 2 more precincts to go." And she says, "Nope, you got it. That's it." She walked on by. And we didn't believe it still yet. We were waited, and sure enough, those last 2 precincts came in, and we won. And it was just a pretty amazing feeling.
It must have been a very emotional.
Oh, huge,
time.
huge.
Sure.
Probably the most up and down emotion, other than, like, since I wasn't around when my kids were born, since I didn't have babies, so to speak, other than getting married, there's not much more emotional in my life other than that first election. And so yeah, we went, and then we went home, and all my relatives were there, and we stayed up till the sun came up, and had a great time. So that was kind of neat that Grandpa had passed away then, or else all those people wouldn't have been here or anything to celebrate that with us or anything.
And his
like
name was?
Harry Lester Downey, and they just called him Doc, because he was a veterinarian for, he's his own book. What a life Grandpa had. Wounded in World War I, carried that wound. We were there in the house with him when he died. Me and my wife and 2 kids right in the very next room. And I went in there to check on him, and his breathing was getting really shallow, and he just quit. And I just stood there with him for a little while and didn't call the ambulance or anything. People said, "Why didn't you call the ambulance?" He was 96 or 98, and he didn't need to be going to the hospital. He didn't want to. He told us not to, and to send him back to the VA or anything.
He was quite an interesting character.
Oh my! I've got a lot of newspaper articles
yeah.
on him that they wrote back in those days. A couple ladies in particular, and yeah, he was wounded from World War I, and the last many years of his life, that was still an open wound in his leg that we had to dress every day. Every day.
With a little bit of a limp.
Oh yeah, and well, the leg that was wounded in World War I ended up being his good leg from what was his good leg that didn't have a wound, having limping on it. Having carried him all those years and getting kicked. He was a veterinarian, getting kicked by animals and stuff because he treated small animals too, but he delivered a lot of cattle and horses and stuff, and would stay up with them all night and drag them out of there and stuff. And for a bag of peaches or a 5-pound sack of potatoes or whatever, people didn't have much money back in those days. Back when he started, like in the 20s and 30s and stuff. And super interesting guy. But for him to pass away right there before the election, and so his vote didn't count. Well, I said it's a good thing we didn't lose by 1, even though he'd voted absentee. I don't know if they did or not, but they were supposed to pull his ballot, not add it in. So that was a huge time in my life, winning that first election, and then nobody ran against me the next 5 times.
What year was that you?
1990.
90?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I took office, and we were still painting that Robinson post office. And I was new to this game. I didn't know much about politics or anything. I just thought, well, the president, they always have the inauguration thing sometime in, late January or something like that. And so that's probably when I'll take office. Well, we were doing that post office in Robinson. They go, you take office the first Monday in December. I go, oh, crap, I can't. I got to finish this. I'm going to make more money down there in a month than I'm going to make up there all year. And they said, well, sorry, you got to start to work. So I had to sub that job out to Scott Payne and the Rimlinger brothers. John and he's gone. What was his? Cliff. John and Cliff Rimlinger. And Scott Payne finished up that post office. Yeah, down there in Robinson. I didn't there wasn't much money left for me after I got done paying them and all the material bills, but I got a little bit out of it.
Oh, gosh.
But started to work at the courthouse, and that was an interesting experience. I was there for over 20 years, so of course I didn't know anything when I first got there. And by the time I left, I was teaching classes and stuff like that to new clerks, which was interesting. I said I'd always start with these new guys. The first thing I'd say, a government body turns in a levy to ask for money, for their tax money. Like the library here fills out a form, and it ends up at the county clerk's office and goes through the process, and the treasurer then writes checks back out to the city and the library to get their part of the real estate taxes. And that's called a levy. And I said, tell these people, I said, well, we live along a river, so I know all about levies. They keep the water back. When they told me you got to take all these budgets and levies and figure out their tax bills, I said, I didn't have a clue what to do. So real early on, I met a county clerk named Ron Rasmus from Ford County and John Kuntz from Iroquois County, who became a real good friend. And I met them in Champaign for a whole day, and they taught me how to do this 16-column spreadsheet that I still did till the very last day I was there. And I wasn't much of a computer guy. It's all on computer now. But I still use those 16-column spreadsheets, and everything had to balance to the penny.
Little accounting influence that helped.
Yep, sure did. What goes in and got to come out. Yeah. And county clerk job was great to me. I got in at a good time where I got a good pension, good health care. I mean, I have to pay for it, but when you were in the courthouse, you didn't have to pay for it. That was the county paid it. And that's pretty important these days. and courthouse was good to me. You know, and now retirement is. And but while I was still there, I started coaching. Towards the end of my county clerk career, started coaching high school sports. I'd always coached my kids growing up. Emily in softball and volleyball, and Jacob in football and basketball and baseball for years and years, you know, from when they were 4 or 5 till they were in their mid-teens. So I did that for quite a while, and then got out of all the coaching stuff because they were out of school and gone to college and everything. And I had a nephew named Harry, named after my grandpa, and my brother Bob's boy that was going to high school in Martinsville, and their baseball coach quit. So I asked a fellow named Gene Conemacher, who was on the school board. I said, "Hey, Conemacher, you guys better hurry up and hire a baseball coach. It's like February, and they should have been working out all winter." And he says, "Well, we're just waiting for you to put your application in." I said, No. I said, "I've got a job. I'm still working at the courthouse, man." He says, "Oh, you can make it work. You can get out of that courthouse job every day at 3 o'clock or something." I said, "Well, I don't know." Well, long story short, I ended up being the baseball coach for a year or two. Well, 7 years later, I ended up giving it up. But, that was a very rewarding thing. And then coaching baseball was fun at the high school level. And then along came a new basketball coach. And I didn't have an assistant, so I said, "Why don't you be my assistant this year? You like baseball." His name was Kyle Shelton. And he's gone now, back to Lawrenceville, Bridgeport area where he's from. But he said, "All right, if you'll be my assistant basketball coach." Because I'm new to town, don't know anybody. And the guy that used to help, it's because he had a kid on the team. Well, I don't want to have somebody that has a kid on the team. And I said, "Well, our only basketball I've ever coached is like 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. So I'm not an expert here on all that basketball stuff, but I played and stuff. So, all right." And did that with him for a year. And the people that coached the girls, they quit. Doug Danke and Barry Wolf had a very successful run with basketball girls over there. And Robin Downs, married to a fellow named Tony Karras, Marshall girl, was the athletic director, and she became the basketball coach of the girls team and asked me to help her. So that was another one of those deals that you're going to do it for a year. It ended up 7 years later.
When did you actually move to Martinsville?
Moved to Martinsville in 93. In the fall of 93, we bought Grandma and Grandpa's house, which is the house they're going down towards the fairgrounds, first house south of the railroad tracks, that they'd moved in 46 when the boys came home from the war. Because they lived in a small house up in the north end of town, but then the boys were going to college and to the war and stuff, and when they came home, there just wasn't room for everybody anymore. So they bought this place in 46. And then we bought it from, Grandpa died in 90, and Grandma still lived there, and Aunt Marilee lived with her quite a bit. My aunt, my dad's sister, great musician lady and stuff, wonderful person. And we bought it from them. Grandma moved down to stay with Aunt Marilee in 93.
Okay.
And so we moved in time, totally gutted it, all right down to the studs inside. You know, all new drywall, plaster, floors, furnace, roof, everything.
That's a very distinctive looking house too.
Yeah, up on the hill with the
It's
sidewalk
set back.
up there and a big circle drive, Grandpa's veterinary office. And a lot of people don't even realize that there's 20 acres there with 2 ponds behind it. And we call one a pond and one a lake, because one's several acres and one's just a small little pond. And 5 acres tillable back there and stuff. So we had the opportunity to buy that from my uncle, kinda. He was taking care of Grandma's stuff, money, and we bought it for $25,000 and put at least twice that in it. But got a place that we won't be moving from. Grandpa died right there in that living room, and so did his, Grandma Robinson, and my great-grandma died there in that room too. So I tell people that's just fine with me if I die right there too.
It's got family history.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. Unless the kids put me in a nursing home, that's where I'll die too. And so yeah, we moved in there in 93, and been there since, and don't plan on leaving. I like to vacation a little bit, go someplace for a while, but I'm not moving anywhere. Like I say, unless the kids put me someplace eventually. And-
Was there some particular, I guess, world event or a person that really influenced your thinking and may have changed your direction in life?
Nothing that I can think of. It just kind of all seemed to float. You know, one thing just led to another. Like say, Norm and Buck were huge, because I would have never thought to run for county clerk on my own. And I'd probably still be working, doing something if I hadn't had that, but now I've been retired for 3
No,
years.
there's one question I usually ask most people. We look around, we've got so many modern conveniences and all. Is there something that you could say, gosh, I just couldn't live without that?
No, mine would be the opposite. I could live with about all of those. I could live without TV. I could definitely live without computers.
Okay.
Yes. Electricity. You know, I like electricity. And cars, because I like to travel. I like to travel, and I couldn't have done all the traveling, even though I have journals from my relatives way back there, Isaac Bean, about riding his horse to Texas. And every winter he had 13 kids or something like that. He'd ride to Texas, come back, get her pregnant, and go on some other big sabbatical. About sitting down with the Indians that he didn't know and eating dinner with them and stuff like that.
I guess some people refer those as a good old age. But
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think I could.
No, I like my bed and my heat and the air conditioning a little bit, even though last year was the first year we ever had air conditioning in our whole house, just last year.
You get used to that pretty easy too, can't you?
Yeah, I'm kind of spoiled now, yeah.
Bill, if you were traveling somewhere else, maybe on the other side of the ocean, and someone said, gosh, Clark County, Marshall, Martinsville, what would you tell them that might be a place you'd want to visit, and why?
Because of the people, for the most part. It's a little slower paced. It's a rural community. Yeah, that would be it. And I don't know that I would necessarily, if somebody would, I say this every once in a while, people ask me if I was going to take vacation, where would you go? The one, for me, the places like that have been Arlington National Cemetery, the Changing of the Guard. That's the #1 place. I've been to 49 states, all of them except Alaska. And Carrie and I are planning on going to Alaska in June of 2019.
Great.
After she retires. That's a long ways away yet, but that's the plan. I don't mess around with planning.
Are you going to take a cruise up there?
I want to drive. It'll take about 2 months. Yeah,
You are ambitious on
I want
that.
to take about 2 months and drive up there. And Arlington National Cemetery is the #1 place that I've ever been and would recommend for anybody to go to.
You'll enjoy Alaska too. It's fantastic.
Oh, I know. It was my mom's favorite place, and I've had relatives and friends that have lived up there at the time, but I don't have anybody there right now. Maybe somebody will move up there.
You can be your own tour guide.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, it's been a delight visiting with you, and I appreciate your time taking it out
Well, I
for
hope
us.
that's kind of what.
And
let's do it.
you've covered exactly what we like for people to do, where they were started, and what's happened in their lifetimes. Because this is not for just today, tomorrow, or next year, but really,
Posterity.
it's for the future. And there's going to be someone come along and say, gee, I didn't know that about Bill.
And Bill's greatest joy these days, though, is those 6 grandkids. Each of my kids, Emily and Jacob, each have 3, and they each have 2 boys and a girl. Emily has Caden and Layla and Brennan, and Jacob has Hannah and Bryce and Gavin, and they're all a treat. Yeah, they're the best.
Well, I'm glad you're enjoying retirement.
I am.
And that's certainly something I think everyone kind of looks forward to. But sometimes I guess people really don't enjoy it, but obviously you are.
I've heard of that, but I can't
I
imagine.
can't imagine it either.
They have a problem.
But I want to thank you so much. It's been a delight visiting with you. And you've done something to put some facts and figures down in history.
There you go.